Hey guys, my name is Kaylee. In this video, I'm going to be showing y'all how to wire up your aftermarket fog lights. I messed up the first time and realized that my stock wiring does not have enough power to run my aftermarket lights. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use a relay to wire them up in my 2011. In the description below, I'll have a list of tools and parts you need for this install. But first things first is I need to disconnect my negative terminal. All right, so I've got 6 feet of 16 gauge wire, and then I have another one that is 3 feet long. I'm going to go ahead and take my aftermarket connections. I'm going to cut off the back end of them, and I'm going to solder them together with my positives to my positives and my negatives to my negatives. Okay, so I'm going to take these solder heat shrinks, and I'm going to slide one over my negative wire of my 16 gauge wire. And then I'm going to twist together the negative from my aftermarket harness for my fog lights and get those connected. Okay, again, I want to make sure that before I slide these over, I do twist the ends of my wires together. And then I'm going to grab my 3-foot wire and repeat the same steps on here. Okay, so before I slide my protective heat shrink over, I'm going to plug in my harness to my fog light, and then I'm going to touch it to the terminals on my battery to see if it turns on. Okay, so now I'm just going to touch my positive to my positive and my negative to my negative terminals. Good. Okay, so now I'm going to put this heat shrink over my solder, and then I'm going to repeat the same steps on the other side. And now I'm just going to go ahead and take this all-weather tape, and I'm going to tape up the rest of my exposed wires. You don't have to do it, but I highly recommend it. Okay, so I tested this one on my battery as well. Now I'm going to plug it in, and I'm going to run it to my battery. I'm running it up here by my transmission cooler lines. And then I'm going to run it up and behind this driver's side headlight. Okay, so I'm going to take some zip ties and I'm going to secure it where I can. I'm just going to do it loosely for right now. I'm not going to tighten them all the way in case I need to make any adjustments. I'm also going to make sure I get my stock fog light wiring harness, and I also secure that out of the way. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here to my driver's side. Now my stock fog light wiring, I cut off the OEM harness. And I'm going to take a digital multimeter, and what I need to do is I need to figure out which one of these wires is my positive. Do not go by what your harness says, because my harness was completely wrong. Okay, I'm going to connect my red connection, which is my positive, to one of my wires. Okay, so for this next step, I'm going to temporarily reconnect the negative terminal on my battery. Okay, so now I'm going to take my negative connection to my multimeter and connect that to my negative terminal on my battery. And now I'm going to turn on the accessory mode of my truck and turn on my fog lights. Okay, so notice that I do have 12 volts on my multimeter, and that is exactly what I want. And then obviously, if your multimeter is not reading anything, then you have the wrong wire, and your other wire will be your positive. Okay, so now that I have my trigger wire figured out, I'm going to go ahead and re-disconnect my battery. Okay, so now I've got 3 feet of red primary wire. I've wrapped it in my all-weather tape. And I'm going to solder it to my trigger wire, which is that positive that I found out using my multimeter. Okay, so after I put my heat shrink over my solder, I'm now taping my negative wire to my other wire to make this install as clean as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to take the wire running from my fog light and the wire just connected to my stock wiring. I'm going to feed them up. Okay, so now that I have both of my fog light wires over here by my battery along with my trigger wire, I can start making my relay connections. Okay, so I've got 3 feet of 12 gauge wire that I have crimp-on ring terminals on. Now I have the Taco Tunes fuse block in my truck. If you do not have that, you can use one of these. Now the size fuse you use is determined also by how much power is running from your lights. In my case, I'm using a 10 amp fuse. Okay, so my first step is going to be connecting all of my grounds. I'm going to take the negative from my power wire that is running to my fuse block, the negative from my passenger side fog light, and the negative from my driver's side fog light. They're all going to be connecting to my relay, to my ground wire. Okay, so I took my two negatives from the wires running from my fog lights, and I took my ground from my relay, and I took my negative that is going to be running power from my fuse block, and I connected them all together, and now I'm going to solder them. Okay, so now I'm going to take the positive wire from my power wire that is coming from my fuse block, and I'm going to solder it to my blue wire on my relay. Okay, so now I am connecting my trigger wire to my relay. Now keep in mind that the wire colors do vary from relay to relay, but the numbers always remain the same. Okay, and lastly, I'm connecting my two positives from my wiring running from my fog lights to my yellow wire. Okay, so now I'm going to run my power wire to either my fuse block or my battery, whichever you're using. Going to connect my negative to my grounding location. And now coming over here, I'm going to make sure to connect to my 10 amp fuse. Alright, so this is my positive right here connected to this 10 amp fuse, and over here is my grounding location with my negative. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and reconnect my negative terminal and turn on my lights to make sure they are working, and then after that I will tape up all my connections. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn on my fog lights. And now that I know that they work, I'm going to tape everything up. This diagram will show you how I wired up my relay to power my fog lights. Starting with our ground terminal number 85 on your relay, I connected the ground from my power wire and the ground or negative wires from my aftermarket fog lights. Next, I connected the positive wire from my power wire to my blue wire or number 30 on your relay. Next, I connected the trigger wire coming from my stock fog light wiring to my white wire, which is number 86 on your relay. And lastly, I connected the two positive red wires coming from my new fog lights to my yellow wire, which is number 87 on your relay. Now, if you are not using the Taco Tunes fuse block setup, here is an overview of how you'll make your connections. Make sure you have the correct size fuse installed. Alright, so now that my install is complete, I'm going to go through and clean up my wires. I'm going to zip tie them and make sure they are all secure and do not create any hazard. If y'all have any other 12-volt Tundra videos you'd like me to make, please comment below. I'd love to hear your ideas.